time, I felt that Steel Pulse had their finger absolutely on the button of really furthering British reggae music. They were putting out stuff which was highly charged, highly political. These were black people doing this, and that was just shocking. It was absolutely shocking.
But a new musical alignment was taking place between what had until now been separate musical cultures. It would radically change reggae's impact and acceptance almost overnight. In the late 70s, young British blacks found a musical and ideological ally in the punks.
What we were writing about was everyday life, and what the reggae musicians were writing about was everyday contemporary life, what's happening now, the violence, the poverty, the injustices.
Out of the punky reggae explosion came Rock Against Racism, which was really a response to the rise of the right wing that was happening in the late 70s during the kind of time of social crisis, you know.
Rock Against Racism brought together reggae and punk bands in musical protest and solidarity.
Up to that time, black bands didn't play on the same stage with white bands. That's a really important point to make. People forget that now. You had black concerts and white concerts. We got increasingly large stages to perform in front of, where the audience was saying, we never instigated this segregation between the musicians, and we support this coming together.
Clash offered reggae performers a new audience, but this was reggae in punk clothing.
We weren't trying to do a slavish copy, we're trying to give our interpretation of ingredients to our music, you know. And, you know, people say, oh, it's not like reggae. It wasn't meant to be like reggae. It was we were a punk group, you know.
The Clash embraced the work of respected Jamaican artists and producers like Lee Scratch Perry.
The thing is, Police and Thieves was quite a popular tune at that time. We decided to do a cover of it, which was quite interesting because Lee Perry said, when we finally met him, he said, oh, what do you think of our version? He said, oh, you ruined it, which made me laugh.
The punk movement had in common with the reggae movement was that it was frowned upon. People, you know, looked at it as an inferior genre. So together, you know, they came out fighting, you know, and then everybody wanted to be some reggae in his punk tune.
Dennis Bovell was asked to produce the debut album of the punk band The Slits.
It was very normal for me to feel that music was a conduit for protest, and that's what punk was, and that's what reggae was as well. And I think that's where the two really came together. It's about talking about life on the streets when you were an underdog, where you had no money, you had no voice, and you wanted to point out the wrongs in the world, and your only way through that was through music. I think what reggae really taught punk musicians was about space and letting, you know, being brave enough to let there be holes and gaps, and dub even more than that, because punk was very strict, very fast, you know, get through it as fast as possible, very, very urban, whereas reggae was also came from an urban background, but it was about letting go, being loose, and it was such a relief after the strictness and the minimalism of punk. This is a street way of getting your voice out there, and you know, punk and reggae both did that.
Reggae was now finding its way into even the most unexpected corners of the country. Hidden away in a leafy London suburb was a musical foundry that would feed British sound systems throughout the land.
Well, right now, I cut two wicked dub in a gap for go dry, you know. Yeah, I like the boy tonight. Yeah, I know the cocks are the best sound, man, and we rolling up.
Whilst thumbing through the yellow pages one time, looking for a place to cut an acetate, found Hassel Recordings, phoned up, gone over there, an elderly gentleman who was famed for smoking a big fat cigar. John Hassel answers the door. And we go into his house, into his living room, right? And he's got this wonderful German disc cutting lathe set up in his front room.
They had come to cut an acetate, the metal dub plate from which vinyl records would be cut.
And his wife, Felicity, has offered us like a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and you know. And then we put on these tapes and it's like reggae. You know, imagine stumbling on that through the yellow pages, right? And then we were telling other people, listen, we found a guy who, you know, who knows how to cut reggae.
The cutting straight down, Bobby.
You can have a fantastic sounding thing on the tape and then it all fall to pieces at the cutting end of it. And someone who would be sympathetic to the frequencies and know how to capture that sound from the tape onto the disc. And John was a master at that.
It's an esoteric world. It's a world of subtlety and refinements. To them, sound is important. It has a meaning, so it has to be done right and professionally and proper.
Next stop for Bovel's British dub cuts were the sound systems, where DJs would preview new tunes and gauge whether the dancers liked them. But sound systems only wanted to preview Jamaican imports. To get British reggae played required a further sleight of hand.
So we had this idea to get a machine that could make a big wide hole in records that were pressed in this country and don't put on it made in England. Right? That would be another dead giveaway. So just, you know, and put as little information as possible and then parade them as pre-release and mix them in with the Jamaican stuff. And very often they passed off as that. That was definitely the way of getting our music played on sound systems.
To decide which pre-releases would become hits, sound systems used the old Jamaican tradition of bare-knuckle competition.
It's like, you know, Mike Tyson gonna fight Lennox Lewis. People pay to see and people want to go because they want to see what they don't know what the outcome's gonna be, but they go because, you know, and the sound system clashes. It's the same kind of thing. You know, they want to see who's going to play the best music on the night.
The most powerful and respected sounds were Jashaka, Coxsone, and Saxon. Each sound had its own partisan following and its own DJs.
We were always looking to Jamaica, but when Saxon came along, you know what I mean, Jamaica started to look to us, which was never done before.
There was a new confidence and a sense of homegrown identity to the British sounds coming out of the black communities in areas like Brixton. Perhaps British reggae's most distinctive voice in the late 70s was Linton Kwesi Johnson, who pioneered a distinctively British dub poetry.
Ganja crawling, creeping to the brain, cold lights hurting, breaking, hurting, fire in the head and a dread beat, bleeding, beating, fire.
Dread is dread, dread is fear. Dread is a kind of terror. Dread beaten blood is kind of it's a kind of a metaphor for